Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today we are unpacking an absolutely fascinating and honestly highly polarized debate that is basically raging across social media right now. We're going to perform a bit of an autopsy on a massive modern cultural phenomenon, the death of the traditional meet cute.
I mean, it really makes you wonder, right? What actually happened to the days of just walking up to someone, striking up a conversation, and seeing where it goes? The source material specifically points back to the 90s and early 2000s. Back then, it was the ultimate cultural ideal. We saw it in literally every movie and TV show. But today, that kind of spontaneous, organic connection seems to have completely vanished.
Okay, let's dive into this. To make sense of this massive shift, we're going to conduct a structured, entirely impartial autopsy of the situation. First up, the death of the chase. Second, why men stopped approaching. Third, the marriage contract dilemma. Fourth, the loneliness economy. And finally, flipping the lonely narrative. All right, Section 1, the death of the chase. Waiting for a move. So, right off the bat, there is immense frustration coming from women who are looking for that traditional romantic pursuit. But the sheer scale of the male retreat here is staggering. The source highlights this hard number, and it's absolutely wild. 44% of Gen Z men have never approached a woman in public. To put that into perspective, nearly half of an entire generation of men has completely opted out of the very first step of traditional dating. And you can see how this completely breaks down communication. Take the classic gym interaction, for example. On the female side, the view is, she makes eye contact, smiles, and spends maybe an hour and a half giving very clear cues, fully expecting him to come over. But the male view? It's entirely different. To him, eye contact is absolutely not a green light. His primary concern is avoiding being secretly recorded and labeled a creep on TikTok. So it's the exact same interaction, interpreted in two radically different, totally incompatible ways. Which brings us to Section 2, why men stopped approaching. Risk versus reward. Now we've seen the female frustration, but men in this debate are offering some massive pushback. They argue that modern romantic expectations have become completely untethered from reality. As the source notes, their stance is basically, life's not a fairy tale and you're not Cinderella. There's this harsh male perspective presented in the debate, claiming that many women waiting to be approached are relying entirely on their looks, while according to them, severely lacking in personality, hobbies, or engaging energy. The absolutely crucial point being made here is all about proactive effort. The source puts this so vividly, they say, if you're trying to hunt an elephant, you're not going to do it in Antarctica. It's a great analogy. The argument is that women expecting to meet men need to actively go to the watering holes where the men actually are. The idea that you can just dress up, stand in a room, and expect the right guy to seamlessly fall into your lap with zero effort, well, apparently, those days are over. Which leads to this super pointed remark from the source. Go into the woods, ladies. Plenty of single bears out there. This is, of course, a direct reference to that viral internet debate about whether women feel safer alone in the woods with a bear or a man. And the male response in this debate essentially says, fine, if you view us as a threat, we simply won't approach you. But you're going to have to either step up and approach us yourselves or face the exact isolation and loneliness that you are currently complaining about. Moving on to Section 3, the marriage contract dilemma, love versus law. Now, this hesitancy to approach extends far beyond just saying hello. The men speaking out aren't necessarily against long-term monogamous relationships per se, but their objections to the actual legal contract of marriage are incredibly businesslike. We're talking massive financial liability, unnecessary government involvement, the crippling risk of lifelong alimony, and a real distrust of judges distributing their hard-earned assets if the whole thing goes south. To these guys, marriage is no longer a romantic milestone. It is just a high-risk, low-reward legal contract. And honestly, nothing captures that deep skepticism better than this striking quote from the source. A wedding is just a funeral with cake. Wow. It is a heavy, cynical view for sure, but it perfectly illustrates the perceived legal traps and this profound loss of romantic idealism that is fueling this modern dating strike among men. Let's shift gears to Section 4, the loneliness economy, a collective isolation. To really understand this whole debate, we have to look at the underlying disease here. The loneliness economy is defined as this modern state where people are collectively isolated, struggling desperately to create authentic connections in the real world. And this has been massively amplified by technology, dating apps, and the lingering social effects of COVID-19. It's a great reminder that at our core, we as humans are biologically wired for connection. The very fact that both sides of this debate are so incredibly frustrated proves that this isolation is an unnatural state for us.
But who is actually feeling the sting of this loneliness the most? Well, there's a pretty stark contrast between what we hear online and reality. The dominant internet narrative claims there's a massive male loneliness epidemic sweeping society, but the source asserts a totally different reality. It claims that if you actually look at real-world singles events, they are almost entirely populated by women seeking connection. Meanwhile, according to the source, a large portion of men are simply disengaging from the dating scene altogether, and importantly, they claim to be quite happy doing so. And that brings us to Section 5, Flipping the Lonely Narrative. Who is actually devastated? In its final act, the source material forcefully argues that the lonely male narrative is, well, just marketing propaganda. Instead, it claims that it's actually women who are projecting their own extreme loneliness onto men. And it lists some very specific behaviors as proof of this devastation. Things like women turning 30 and panicking about being completely alone, insulting happily married women by calling them pick-me's, this bizarre trend of asking to borrow a married friend's husband to do household chores, and ultimately retreating to the internet to seek validation from other isolated women. A major reason given for this disconnect is that relationships are now viewed as highly transactional. The source argues that modern dating has basically lost its soul, because many individuals are supposedly failing to bring actual value, partnership, or personality to the table. They're instead leading purely with their bodies, while expecting financial compensation and lifestyle funding in return. It's a harsh critique, right? It frames romance as more of a hostile negotiation than a union. And bringing this whole thing full circle, the source highlights how, when men simply exercise their option to reject a woman or opt out of the chase entirely, the immediate defensive response is so often, "Oh, he must be gay." It's an insult that completely ignores all the complex, systemic reasons we've literally just outlined, the fear of being recorded, the legal risks of marriage, the transactional nature of modern dating, and instead just relies on a dismissive stereotype. So, this leaves us with a really tragic irony to ponder. If, as the loneliness economy suggests, human beings are fundamentally wired for connection, why are we collectively choosing isolation? We've seen today how both sides are building walls rather than bridges. Thank you so much for exploring this explainer with me today, and as always, keep questioning the world around you.